Welcome to episode 13 of the Ulysses Unlocked podcast, where we analyze Ulysses by James Joyce one page at a time. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to support us. So today we are diving deep into pages 17 and 18, and honestly, for just 2 pages of text, the sheer amount of history, politics, even occult stuff that Joyce packs in here is pretty staggering.
It really is. We've pulled together quite a bit. Some folklore studies on familiar spirits, literary criticism, looking at, modernism's roots.
Yeah, a whole stack. And we're using all of it to give you, the listener, the best possible shortcut to understanding what's really going on in this moment for Stephen Dedalus. It's quite pivotal.
Absolutely pivotal. I mean, you've got these few lines of dialogue, but they managed to unpack Stephen's whole struggle with colonial rule and religious baggage.
And then there's all the heretical theology bubbling underneath.
Exactly. And it even sets up this huge literary rivalry, one of the biggest of the 20th century. So our mission really is threefold.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, we need to properly unpack Stephen's big declaration about who his masters are. It's a famous line.
Right.
Second, we're going to do a proper deep dive into that seemingly casual phrase he uses for his walking stick, his familiar. There's a fascinating history there.
The ash plant, yeah. I'm really curious about that one.
And finally, we'll sort of zoom out, look at the bigger picture, and see how these images, especially the drowned man we encounter later, actually fueled Joyce's claim that T.S. Eliot, basically ripped him off.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to cover from just 2 pages. But you're right, these pages are dense enough to handle it. Let's start with that opening bit of dialogue then. Stephen and Haines talking about belief, or lack of it.
Yeah, it kicks off with Haines, the Englishman. He's being polite, maybe a little detached, and he starts talking about religion.
He says something like he couldn't really buy the idea of a personal God.
Exactly. Couldn't stomach that idea of a personal God. Line 623, 624. He's sort of offering it up as common ground, assuming Stephen, the intellectual who's left the church, feels the same easy kind of freedom.
But Stephen doesn't react that way at all, does he? Haines seems to think freedom from belief makes you your own master, but Stephen sees it differently.
Totally differently. When Haines asks if he's an atheist, Stephen's response is described as having grim displeasure.
And he calls himself a horrible example of free thought. That phrase really jumps out.
It does. Horrible example. It tells you straight away that his freedom isn't comfortable. It's not liberating in the way Haines imagines. It's difficult. It's isolating, maybe even painful for him.
Yeah, it's cost him something.
Definitely. And Haines just misses it. He hears free thought and jumps straight to autonomy. He asks Stephen, "You're your own master then?" Line 637.
That's the key question, isn't it? Because Stephen's answer turns everything on its head. Rejecting the church and the state doesn't mean he's independent.
Not at all. It's just maybe swapping one kind of servitude for another. Or maybe acknowledging the ones that were always there.
And that leads to probably one of the most quoted lines from this part of the book.
The big declaration. "I am a servant of 2 masters, an English and an Italian." Line 638.
Delivered with such bitterness.
Sharp, painful clarity. Yeah. And Haines is genuinely thrown by the Italian part. He asks, "Italian?"
Because politically, the obvious master is Britain, right? The empire.
Exactly. So Stephen has to explain the second one, but he does it internally, in his own thoughts. He thinks of the Catholic Church as a crazy queen, old and jealous. Kneel down before me.
Wow, that personification. It shows how deeply personal and controlling that influence feels to him. Not just an institution, but this demanding figure.
Absolutely. It's psychological damage he's describing.
And then he adds a third master, almost as an afterthought.
Yeah, he kind of throws it in there, "Who wants me for odd jobs?" Line 641.
Which we figure is probably about the day-to-day stuff, like dealing with Mulligan, petty demands.
That's the likely reading. The small, constant obligations that drain his energy, pull him away from his art. But the 2 big ones, the ones that really define his cage.
He names them explicitly.
He does. Line 643, 644. The Imperial British state, that's the English master, and the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, the Italian one.
Empire and church, the 2 massive forces shaping Ireland and shaping him. He feels politically and spiritually colonized.
Nailed it. And what's really fascinating, and something the source material points out, is the huge difference in how Stephen and Haines react to this statement. Stephen pours all his angst into it.
And Haines just stays completely calm, almost infuriatingly so.
Right. The text says he detaches some fibers of tobacco, line 645. It's such a deliberate, casual gesture, Like he's intentionally downplaying the intensity.
He doesn't engage with the rebellion in it, or the personal pain.
Not at all. He frames it as like a historical thing, an academic curiosity. He says, I can quite understand that. An Irishman must think like that, I dare say.
Oh, that's condescending.
It really is. And then he adds, we feel in England that we have treated you rather unfairly. It seems history is to blame.
Wow. Blaming history. That's the ultimate sidestep, isn't it? It lets England and Haines himself completely off the hook for any present responsibility.
Exactly. Stephen's making this huge existential declaration about rejecting his past and the powers that control him, and Haines just reduces it to, oh, well, that's just how you Irish chaps think because of, history.
It completely dismisses the seriousness of Stephen's struggle. His intellectual revolt becomes just like a quaint ethnic trait.
Precisely. Haines basically turns Stephen's internal firestorm into sociological background noise. And maybe that's why Stephen's thoughts immediately shift. He rejects the state's indifference and the church's tyranny and seems to turn towards the one thing that might actually be loyal to him.
His walking stick. The ash plant.
Yeah, which he calls his familiar.
Okay, let's dig into that, because this is where things get really interesting, moving into folklore and, well, the occult.
It's such a striking detail. Stephen's walking along, the ash plant is trailing behind him, and the metal tip, the ferrule, is squealing at his heels.
And he thinks, my familiar after me, calling Stephen. Lines 628, 629, that word familiar, it's doing a lot of work there.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just like calling it his buddy or his pal. He's deliberately choosing a word with deep historical and, frankly, magical resonance.
So for us today, familiar might just mean, something well known. But historically, what exactly was a familiar spirit? This is a key part of our deep dive.
Right. So in European folklore, especially around the medieval and early modern periods, a familiar spirit was basically a supernatural entity. It could be a guardian spirit, could be something more demonic.
And its job was?
Its job was to assist people involved in magic. That could be witches practicing, harmful magic, or cunning folk village healers, diviners, or even more learned magicians. They were like supernatural assistants or agents.
And our sources emphasize these weren't just wisps of smoke, right? They were seen as tangible things.
That's a crucial point for understanding Stephen's ash plant reference. Sources like Owen Davies's work, they stress that familiars were described as having clearly defined three-dimensional forms. They had color, movement, sound.
Unlike ghosts, which were often seen as smoky or undefined.
Exactly. Familiars were often animals. Cats are the classic example, but also dogs, rats, toads, birds, hares.
Sometimes even little humanoid figures.
Sometimes, yeah. But the key thing is they were perceived as concrete beings.
So Stephen's ash plant, this solid physical object, making a noise, following him, it fits that idea of a tangible, almost living companion.
It fits surprisingly well. But the nature of the familiar was really ambiguous. It could be good or evil depending on who it served.
Right, there's that duality.
Yeah. If a familiar was working for someone accused of witchcraft, doing harm, then it was usually seen as a demon, something malevolent. Often there were pacts involved, maybe involving blood.
But if it served the cunning folk, the village healers,
then it was often seen as benevolent. Maybe a type of fairy or a helpful spirit that offered protection, diagnosed illnesses, found lost things, helped with predictions, much more about practical help and guidance.
Okay, so where does Stephen fall on that spectrum? He calls himself a horrible example of free thought, which sounds kind of heretical, leaning towards the dark side.
It does have that rebellious, potentially heretical edge.
Yeah.
But his situation, he's poor, isolated, struggling. His needs are closer to those served by the cunning folks' familiars.
Protection, guidance, finding a way through.
Exactly. Think about the functions. Protection, diagnosis, maybe self-diagnosis for Stephen, finding lost things or treasures, artistic inspiration, divination. His ash plant is literally his support, his potential weapon, the tool he leans on.
So it becomes his only reliable ally in a hostile city. It's not the church, not the state, but the stick.
It is. And the ways people supposedly got familiars, according to the historical accounts, are also really telling for Stephen's mindset.
How did that work? Did you just find one?
Well, the British records suggest a few ways. One was spontaneous appearance. The familiar shows up, often when the person is alone, vulnerable. There's an account of Joan Prentice saying hers appeared when she was just sitting on a stool getting ready for bed.
Like magic intervening in a very mundane moment.
Pretty much. Another way was inheritance. Passed down, often from mother to daughter, like Margaret Lay, who supposedly got hers from her dying mother. So it could be part of a lineage.
Okay. And the third way, you said that one was particularly relevant to Stephen.
Yes. The third way is strongly linked to hardship and survival. Familiars were often said to appear to help people who were in real difficulty, lack of food, money, sickness, losing their social standing.
So the familiar offers a kind of magical shortcut when normal means fail.
That's the idea. It offered power, a way out of a desperate situation. We even have names for some of these familiars like Tom Reed for Bethy Dunlop or Grizel and Grittigat for Jane Wallace. They were specific entities tied to survival magic.
So putting it all together, Stephen feels abandoned by church and state. He's isolated, broke, maybe artistically blocked.
He's in crisis, absolutely. Intellectually, spiritually, materially.
So calling his stick his familiar is like saying, okay, forget the grand institutions. My only loyalty, my only support comes from this basic, almost pagan partnership forged out of pure necessity.
It's exactly that. He's trading the crushing weight of those two huge masters for one small, private, potentially dark allegiance that's rooted in his immediate struggle to simply endure and create.
It's a powerful, multi-layered act of rebellion. It connects his lofty philosophical ideas right down to the gritty reality of just trying to get by in Dublin.
Yeah.
His genius isn't fueled by faith or patriotism, but by this personal sorcery.
It's the ultimate anti-authoritarian gesture in a way, turning his back on the big powers and finding solidarity with his walking stick.
And speaking of anti-authoritarianism, that internal reflection on the familiar seems to flow straight into this intense mental dive into heresy.
It does. It's like acknowledging his familiar opens the floodgates to thinking about his relationship with the biggest authority he rejected, the church.
The conversation with Haines, the thoughts about the stick, they kind of fade out, and suddenly his mind is just filled with the sheer power and history of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, he hears those proud, potent titles like brazen bells. He specifically recalls the Latin from the Nicene Creed, et unam sanctam Catholicum et apostolicum ecclesiam.
The one holy Catholic and apostolic church, the full weight of its claim to universal, unbroken authority.
And he contrasts that immense stability, the slow growth and change of rite and dogma, this thing built over centuries with his own thoughts.
His own rare thoughts, he calls them, a chemistry of stars.
Beautiful phrase, isn't it? It suggests something brilliant, maybe volatile, unique, but also isolated and maybe fragile compared to the church's massive structure.
And that comparison seems to fill him with anxiety. He sees himself aligned against this power.
Definitely. He envisions the church militant, defended by angels, specifically Michael's host, fighting off a horde of heresies fleeing with mitres awry.
The hats of bishops knocked sideways as they run away. He sees himself as one of those fleeing heretics.
He absolutely identifies with them. And this is where Joyce flexes Stephen's deep theological knowledge. He doesn't just vaguely reject the church. He knows exactly which historical battles he's echoing.
We get this amazing roll call of major heresiarchs, the church's greatest intellectual enemies.
That's like the greatest hits of heresy. He starts with Photius,
who was involved in the split between the Eastern and Western churches, right? Challenged the Pope.
That's him.
Yeah.
So Stephen's linking his personal rebellion to a major historical schism.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, he connects Photius to mockers, which seems like a clear nod back to Mulligan and others whose skepticism feels shallow compared to Stephen's deep struggle.
Then comes Arius, a huge name in early church history.
Arguably the biggest challenge the early church faced. Arius kicked off a debate that rocked the Roman Empire for decades. His big thing was questioning whether Jesus was truly fully God or just the first and greatest being created by God.
The whole homoousios versus homoousios debate, same substance versus similar substance.
Exactly. That one-letter difference, I or no I, defined the core of Christology. Was Christ co-eternal and equal with the Father or subordinate? Councils were called, emperors got involved. Stephen knows he's playing in that league of rebellion.
And he doesn't stop there. He brings up Valentine, too.
Valentinus, the Gnostic. He apparently rejected the idea that Christ had a real, physical, terrene body. Denied the incarnation, in a sense.
Which kind of resonates with Stephen's own tendency towards the intellectual and spiritual, maybe away from the messy physical world.
It does seem to fit. And then there's Sabellius, the subtle African heresiarch.
What was his heresy?
Sabellius taught modalism. Basically, the idea that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit weren't distinct persons, but just different modes or masks that the one God wore at different times. It challenged the doctrine of the Trinity itself.
So Photius, Arius, Valentine, Sabellius, these aren't minor figures. They represent fundamental challenges to church authority, the nature of Christ, the Trinity, even the physical reality of faith. Stephen is consciously placing himself in that lineage.
He is. He sees himself standing alongside these intellectual giants who dared to question the foundations.
But then the mood shifts again, doesn't it? Right after listing these rebels, he has this moment of doubt.
A profound moment, he thinks. The void awaits surely all them that weave the wind. Line 662.
Weave the wind. What does that mean to you?
It feels like a metaphor for futile effort. Trying to create something substantial out of nothing. He fears that all this intellectual rebellion, his rare thoughts, might ultimately be meaningless, ephemeral, just dissipating into emptiness because they lack the solid structure, the reality that the church possesses.
He fears his own chemistry of stars might just fizzle out into the void. A terrifying thought for an artist.
It really is. The fear that his life's work, his entire identity, is built on sand.
And just as he hits that philosophical rock bottom, grappling with the potential meaninglessness of his own existence,
Haines breaks in, completely shatters the mood. It's such a classic Joycean move, the descent from the heights of philosophical angst to the mundane, often ugly reality of the present moment.
Talk about whiplash. Haines just pulls the conversation right back down to earth, ignoring all that theological turmoil happening inside Stephen's head.
Totally ignores it. And he pivots to, well, contemporary politics and prejudice. He declares himself a Britisher and then voices this very specific fear.
The line about German Jews.
Yeah, I don't want to see my country fall into the hands of German Jews either. That's our national problem, I'm afraid, just now. Line 667, 669.
It's pretty chilling. You go from debating the Holy Trinity 1 second to this raw contemporary xenophobia the next.
And it serves as this stark reminder, doesn't it, that the Imperial British state, one of Stephen's masters, is riddled with these kinds of mundane, destructive prejudices. It anchors the high-flying philosophy back into the muck of the present day.
Okay, so that whole intense exchange ends on that rather sour note from Haines, and then the focus of the text shifts quite dramatically, doesn't it? Out towards the bay.
It does. Physically, emotionally, the scene just opens up. We move from the internal claustrophobic debate to the wider landscape.
And immediately the focus lands on death and decay, picking up on Stephen's fear of the void, perhaps?
You can definitely read it that way. We see two men first, right? A businessman and a boatman just standing near the cliff. Very ordinary.
Having a very practical chat about boats and tides.
Yeah, mundane details. The boat's heading for Bullock Harbor. The tide will turn around 1 o'clock. The water's 5 fathoms out there. Grounding details.
But they lead directly to the image that hangs over this whole section of the book.
The drowned man. The man who drowned 9 days before. The casual, practical chat makes the description that follows even more stark, more chilling.
It's really one of the most graphic and memorable images in the early part of Ulysses, I think.
It stays with you. That image of the bay, the sail, veering about the blank bay, waiting.
Waiting for what?
Waiting for a swollen bundle to bob up, roll over to the sun, a puffy face, salt white. Line 675, 677. It's just so visceral. The bloating, the passivity, the final inevitable appearance.
And then that final phrase, "Here I am," attributed almost to the corpse itself.
That's what gives it such power, isn't it? It's like the dead man is announcing himself. This inanimate, decaying thing suddenly given this terrifying, defiant voice. A grotesque arrival.
It's an image that screams decay, not just the body, but maybe the whole city, the whole state of things. It's a brutal counterpoint to Stephen's chemistry of stars. If his ideas are wind, this is the inescapable physical end.
Precisely. This is the grim reality waiting beneath the surface. And this image, this theme of drowning death, the city as a kind of hell. This is where Joyce's work directly connects with and eventually clashes with his great contemporary and rival, T.S. Eliot.
Right. This sets up the whole discussion about literary influence and, well, accusations of theft.
Exactly. Because Ulysses and Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, both came out in 1922. They are like the twin pillars of literary modernism, both grappling with the wreckage of Europe after the First World War.
But it wasn't just a parallel development. Joyce actually felt Eliot had taken things from him.
He did. Joyce was apparently quite competitive and protective of his work. Our sources say he viewed Eliot as plagiarizing freely with inferior results. He felt Eliot had filched some of his thunder.
Strong words, and the accusation wasn't baseless because Eliot had read parts of Ulysses before The Wasteland was finished.
Yes, Ulysses was being published in installments in literary magazines.
Yeah.
Eliot knew the work. And critics like Joseph Campbell pointed out these constant echoes between the two.
Including the drowned man.
Including the drowned man, yes. And also the voice of thunder motif. Eliot specifically seems to draw on Joyce's Proteus's episode, which we're in right now, and the later Hades episode, where death and decay are central.
You can definitely see the parallel. The drowned man here, and Phlebas the Phoenician, the drowned sailor in the wasteland. The imagery is incredibly similar.
It's strikingly similar. Both used to symbolize death, decay, maybe a kind of sterile end. But the question is, does using similar imagery, drawing on similar themes circulating at the time, actually count as plagiarism?
It gets murky, doesn't it? Especially when you bring in the third key figure in this whole network.
Ezra Pound. You absolutely cannot understand the relationship between Joyce and Eliot or modernism itself without Pound.
He was the great connector, the editor, the promoter.
He was the engine room, really.
Yeah.
Pound championed both Joyce and Eliot. Crucially, Pound helped Eliot get the editorship of the Egoist magazine right when Ulysses was being serialized in it.
So Eliot wasn't just casually reading Joyce, he was professionally obligated to engage deeply with the text as it came out.
Exactly. Pound essentially created this environment, this crucible, where these writers were intensely aware of each other's work, influenced by the same cultural shifts, the same anxieties.
And influenced directly by Pound's own aesthetic ideas and his editing pencil.
Massively. Pound's editing of The Wasteland is legendary. He cut huge swaths of it, sharpened the focus, arguably imposed some of his own vision onto it. So this common language of modernism, these shared images like the drowned man, might stem less from direct theft.
And more from shared exposure, shared milieu, and especially Pound's heavy guiding hand shaping the language of the era.
That's a much more nuanced way to look at it, I think.
Yeah.
It becomes less about Joyce versus Eliot and more about the collective, sometimes fraught process of forging a new literary style, with Pound acting as a catalyst, maybe even a conduit.
But even if the language has overlaps, the ultimate purpose or worldview behind the works is fundamentally different, right? That seems key to refuting the simple plagiarism claim.
Absolutely crucial. This is where they diverge completely. Both Joyce and Eliot use Dante's Divine Comedy as a kind of template. They both see the modern city London for Eliot, Dublin for Joyce, as a contemporary version of hell, an inferno.
But their way out of that inferno is totally different. Eliot is moving towards
Christian faith, towards the salvation of civilization itself. The Wasteland is bleak, yes, depicting spiritual drought. But Eliot's later work, especially four quartets, functions as his paradiso. It completes the Dantean journey, offering a path to redemption through religious belief and tradition. For Eliot, there is a transcendent escape possible.
Okay, but Joyce, the man who has Stephen thinking about heretics and his pagan familiar stick.
Joyce's framework is completely different. It's rooted in Homer's Odyssey, the individual's journey, which Joyce called the most human theme. His perspective is fundamentally agnostic, maybe even pagan, and focused squarely on the individual's struggle.
So in Ulysses, there's no grand salvation for society offered.
Not really. The Hades episode, which echoes the drowned man theme, really emphasizes that everyone in Dublin is bound by death. The city is hell, and the escape isn't transcendent or religious.
It's more personal, more domestic, like Leopold Bloom just trying to get home.
Exactly. Bloom's triumph is making it back to Molly. It's an escape achieved through endurance, humanity, maybe love, but it's an escape from the city's hell into the flawed reality of his own life. It doesn't promise universal salvation, or even, as the source notes, guaranteed lasting happiness.
Just survival, maybe, a temporary harbor.
A temporary harbor, yes. Joyce gives us the inferno of Dublin in excruciating detail, but he refuses to provide a clear, certain paradiso. It's about navigating the hell, not necessarily finding heaven.
So the argument against plagiarism boils down to this. Eliot might have borrowed some bricks, some images, maybe consciously, maybe via Pound, but he used them to build a fundamentally Christian structure aiming for spiritual renewal.
Whereas Joyce used those same thematic bricks, decay, death, the urban hell, to build a structure focused on the agnostic, individual struggle for survival and meaning in a world without clear divine answers.
The aesthetics might overlap, but the core philosophies are worlds apart.
Precisely. So calling it simple plagiarism really misses the complexity of their relationship, Pound's role, and the profound difference in their ultimate artistic visions.
Wow. Okay, that brings us full circle. From Stephen's personal declaration of servitude, through the surprisingly deep history of his walking stick, the clash with heresy, the image of death, and right into the heart of the biggest literary rivalry of the era, all sparked by these 2 pages.
It's incredible density. We saw Stephen define himself against these huge controlling forces, church and state, and significantly, finding his only seemingly loyal companion not in God or country, but in his humble, familiar ash plant, a symbol born from his own hardship.
And we saw how that grim image of the drowned man, surfacing in Dublin Bay, became more than just a symbol of decay within Ulysses. It became a flashpoint in the debate about originality and influence that shaped modernism itself, highlighting how Eliot and Joyce used similar tools to craft vastly different messages about life, death, and the possibility of salvation.
It really shows Stephen defining himself by what enslaves him, or what he needs to survive, like that familiar spirit. Which leads to a final thought, maybe.
Go for it.
We talked about how familiars, in folklore, were often acquired in moments of real hardship, out of necessity. So, thinking about Stephen and his ash plant, maybe you, the listener, could consider, what would you identify as the familiar that follows you? The thing that metaphorically squeals your name? Is it something that arose from your own struggles, maybe a necessary darkness you rely on? Is it a benevolent guide? Or is it just a reflection of the pressures and anxieties you're trying to navigate, trying to escape?
That's a fascinating question to leave everyone with. What's the familiar in your own life? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.